Hi, folks, and welcome to Leadership and Innovation Unlocked with Inclusive Collective, where we bring you news and analysis of the latest in people and workplace culture and share stories and learnings of leaders and organizations driving performance and innovation through inclusion. I am your co-host, Dr. Nadia Butt, a workplace culture strategist and talent development consultant, and I'm here with my dear friend, Rob Hadley, a people and culture strategist specializing in operational excellence, transformations, and analytics. Hi,
Hey,
Rob.
that sounds good.
Rob.
I was just thinking,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, Nadia.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
was
I
just
do have a
thinking that
question. Go ahead.
all the strange facial expressions that I usually give,
Yeah,
and
and they're gonna be
movement,
captured.
they're now on video. So yeah,
Folks, if you don't know it, we are on our entire episode is on YouTube now. So you can catch the awkward facial expressions that Rob provides and eye roll sometimes at me. And I'm just
I
kidding.
don't eye roll.
You don't eye
Yeah,
roll.
yeah.
Sometimes you do like the eyebrow goes up, like you question what I'm saying, but no, I mean for the most part. Um But yeah, how I want to know how your week was, but before we dive in there, I was actually wondering how your week was related to hearing about some of the news out there. I think Target had like 7,000 layoffs, and Amazon had, I think it was like 30,000 corporate layoffs.
Yeah.
And well, that comes after several layoffs at like Microsoft and Google, like from a few months ago, even like the end of last year. Just curious, like any thoughts regarding those layoffs or just around people and livelihood?
Well, one nice thing about working for yourself is no one can lay you off, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I guess they cannot hire you
Yeah, that's true.
repeatedly.
I want to work,
It
but
it works both ways, but no, I mean, I think that there's a lot of stuff around, this is the start of a white collar, uh, where AI is gonna take a lot of white collar jobs, and you're starting to see it. I'm not as convinced. I mean, if you think about the companies that we're talking about, especially on the tech side,
yeah.
those companies got too big, right? Like, they got too big. Their stocks are inflated, and so there's just gonna have to be some natural letting of air out in those
Right.
sectors.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you think about the economy, like I was just writing down, so there's tariffs, um,
Mhm.
the labor shortage based on, the harassment of certain labor and certain types of people,
Yeah.
the HB1 visa issues, right?
Yeah.
Um,
SNAP
the
benefit.
Yeah, I mean, like the shutdown, right? So start these SNAP
Yeah, government
benefits,
now. Yeah.
like the research and development funding or lack of funding. We've done everything we possibly can to slow down the economy. I mean, this is like
Yeah.
this is a anti-growth agenda to the extreme. And
Yeah.
so a counterbalance on the other side with an AI bubble. And so you're going to see a lot of weird stuff happening. And
Like
unfortunately,
economy-wise, you mean,
workers
or
are going to take the brunt of that. And it's
yeah.
going to happen. Hopefully, it'll be less dramatic than some of the previous downturns.
Yeah. Yeah, same sentiments. Just really, I almost just, and I'm on LinkedIn. I see a lot of people supporting each other. Look, folks like looking for jobs. So keep that up. I think on LinkedIn, especially, it's just a great avenue to network and to share other roles out there. I know, like, anytime I see a role that's posted from someone that I know in my network, I try to repost it so that someone who's looking can, maybe it comes across their desk and they're like, that's something I'd go for. So just encouraging folks to continue that networking for folks that might be on that other end of looking for a job.
Yep. Yep. Take care of each other and lean into community as things
Yeah,
start to slow down a little bit.
for sure. For sure. All
All right,
right.
Nadia. So
So
we're going to do something a little bit different with the deets this week,
yeah,
our weekly roundup. All
I
right.
know.
So this past week, Nadia, the Society of Human Resource Management, SHRM, we know them as
Hmm.
SHRM, had their annual conference, The Blueprint. The Blueprint,
Hmm.
also a Jay-Z album from the early 2000s, right? I don't know if you remember that one.
You talk a
And
lot about DZ on this
the
podcast.
I met a
Actually,
guy
no, for
named
10
I
years.
met a guy
Yeah.
named Jay-Z yesterday. Like
Did
his name was Jay's, like it was Jay Zhang, and so he called himself Jay-Z.
you?
That's pretty cool.
Okay.
All right.
You
So the
didn't
main
really
event at the
talk
Blueprint.
about him on this
Yeah.
podcast.
The main event for the Blueprint, SHRM has taken a lot of heat for their moderation around DEI issues over the last couple of years. The main event was a conversation between Van Jones, the former Obama administration official and CNN commentator, and a gentleman named Robbie Starbuck, who
Mhm.
I will describe as an anti-DEI activist. This person was behind the campaigns to end DEI at many companies, including Harley Davidson, Coors, John Deere, and others. Many SHRM members were upset that they would give this platform to Mr. Starbuck, who was
Mhm.
called DEI immoral, communist. He has defended replacement theory. He said a number of terrible things about the LGBTQ community as well. He's a very inflammatory figure. And so the idea was they wanted to bring folks on the stage to talk across their differences in a civil way. And so
Mhm.
I just wanted to just kind of talk about it and hear what your thoughts were.
Yeah, so, thanks for that. I will say, like, when this was announced, like, months ago, I remember the backlash specifically on LinkedIn, and I too myself, like, I don't know a lot of, like, conservative, like, radical conservative people, and I feel like the last, like, 3 months, I just all of a sudden know all of these people that kinda have very different thoughts than I do. And
Hmm.
so, when it was announced, I was like, "Who is this Robbie Starbuck person?" Initially, I was like, "Does he work at Starbucks? Like, what's happening?" No, he doesn't. But I did I just wanted to understand who he was. I know like Van Jones. I don't really know. I'm not like necessarily a huge fan of Van Jones. But have listened to him on CNN, have heard him speak at other events and conferences and stuff. Um, I do appreciate the host who is the current SHRM CEO and president, I believe. And
Johnny
I
Taylor.
Johnny Taylor, yeah. And I actually really like Johnny and thought he did a good job. I'm gonna pause there because I do have more to say and I don't want to take up all the time.
Well,
But like, what were your initial
let me get
thoughts?
into like just like the gist of the discussion, like some of the things that I had, and then maybe you have some of the same things
I'll
as well,
react to
right?
it.
So,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So first of all, I thought that Mr. Jones was very impressive, and I thought just to bring it back to leadership.
I would agree with that.
So for the young folks out there, he did two things. First, he anchored his pro DEI arguments, right? So like he wasn't necessarily built as like a pro DEI person, but he had these pro DEI arguments on something that everyone could agree with, right? He said that we all have to build world class teams, and he was speaking at a conference of HR professionals, and
Yep.
he anchored that on the problem that they had to solve, right? And then he made it personal, saying that the people in the room had been vilified by people like Mr. Starbuck. So
Yeah.
really just kind of a masterclass in presence and communication. On the opposite side, and I'll be civil as well, since that was the point of that conversation, like
Mhm.
Mr. Starbuck was all about himself, right? Like, and really
Yeah.
talked about, he never really acknowledged the audience or acknowledged his role in vilifying the work that they were doing. And, it was very incoherent arguments that he was putting forth. And right. So, I think that was, the one of the takeaways I had was that the person that spends all of his time around ending DEI seemed to have very little idea of what DEI was in a very
Or
practical sense.
or really being able to define the difference between equality and equity because that was something that was he was like really focusing on.
Yeah, yeah. No, he was very, he at one point, he was asked if there was any good DEI, and he said no
Mhm.
because it has equity in it, which is a Marxist concept, right? And so,
Mhm.
um, you know, we talked last week about Toyota working to build a daycare center in
Yeah.
rural Iowa. And as we had discussed, by giving some employees access to childcare, there are people that could work at that plant that they otherwise couldn't, right? So they
Mhm.
had something that, access to something that allowed them to work and compete with others. And that program doesn't help everyone, right? If I worked there, I wouldn't need it. So is that necessarily Marxist or is it good policy, right? So like that was like really stood out that he doesn't necessarily understand the impact on the ground of what he's talking about. It's kind of a social media arsonist in a lot of the language and the rhetoric that he was using. He also said that 10 years out, we'll look back and say the DEI was silly and we'd be in a much better place. But empirically, just from like the last 2 years, like we've seen that med schools have had lower emissions for women and people of color. Harvard just came out and said Black and Latino student enrollment had dropped. We've seen an exodus of Black women in the workforce. We've seen the gender pay equity gap has actually expanded in the last 2 years. And so I just wonder, like, who is going to be in a better place 10 years out, right? Like, I think we know
Mm,
that
mm.
all the actions that he's taken have led to a place where, folks that have had a harder time in corporate America will continue to have a harder time, right? And it's just made it that much more difficult. The one thing I would hold on to that he said is he said that he's just for neutrality. He gave the example of
Mm,
climate change, and he said that if
yes.
companies said clean air or clean water, then he would be for it because uh, it, everyone benefits from that, and because climate change is a political term. And so maybe it's just the words that and so maybe if they
Or
maybe they could be tricked if they can't be reasoned with.
I'd love to like just know if Robbie had any reflection after that conference, or if he came there with like a purpose and a point, and and that was it. I don't know. What do you
I would
think?
almost certainly guess that he had no reflection upon leaving that room based
Okay.
on what I've seen from him. So I
Yeah.
can almost guarantee it.
Yeah. All right. Well, there we are. Thank you for that, Rob. Folks, I would recommend if you have if it's not going to trigger you, especially because we know SHRM has done some pretty pretty disappointing things over the course of the year, as it relates to things like equity, and then of course now inviting Robbie Starbuck to the conversation. But I would, if you're not triggered by it, I would definitely encourage you to watch the whole interview or panel discussion on LinkedIn or YouTube. All right, Rob, thanks for that discussion. Folks, next up is our conversation with Dr. Golnaz Golnaraghi. Welcome back, folks. This week on Leadership and Innovation Unlocked, we welcome Dr. Golnaz Golnaraghi. She is an award-winning impact entrepreneur and thought leader whose work sits at the intersection of leadership, inclusion, and systems change, all my favorite things. As the leader of Accelerate Her Future and Divity Group, she brings a multi-dimensional lens spanning corporate, academic, and entrepreneurial sectors to reimagine what human-centered, inclusive leadership looks like in practice. Golnaz, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here with you both. Thank you. That was a mouthful, wasn't it? It's
I
always so
love it.
awkward
You've
listening
done
to your own
so
profile.
many wonderful, accomplished
That was the
things.
shortened bio, right?
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
that's
yeah.
a very
Yes.
cool, Naz. It's a great to meet you. Thanks again for being with us. I want to start with human-centered leadership, and I think that most leaders think that they are being human at most times, right? So tell us what you mean by human-centered leadership, and then is there something in your personal experience or career that makes it, something that you're very, passionate about?
So how I define human-centered leadership is, to me, it's inclusive leadership. That's ultimately what it's about. That places people at the center of how we lead. And there are thought leaders that have been talking about this for quite some time. And I think today more than ever, we really do need it. And what that means to me is that we center our people's well-being, we center their lived experiences and context, and really their growth. Mm-hmm. And so that's at the center of organizational success. So by human-centered leadership, I'm not saying results don't matter, they do, but it's how are we achieving those results? How are we getting at those results? That's really important. And so when leaders honor the full human being that's in front of them, when they see, when they hear, when they value the whole person, including their histories, like when we walk into our workplaces, all those things come with us: histories, lived context, our identities. I've already talked about well-being, our aspirations, and our growth, our strengths, all of it. Then we can thrive. And to link it back to the premise of your podcast, when humanizing leadership builds trust, and I always say trust is the new ROI, then we have greater belonging, and that leads to innovation. So maybe it's about leading with people and not over them.
That's a mic drop.
That's a mic drop.
I ever heard one. And it's interesting because I think leaders who seek to become more inclusive or maybe even humanize their leadership approach, I think oftentimes they might run the risk of being perceived as indecisive or
Mm,
being seen as like weak.
that it's soft.
That it's
Yeah,
soft, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
like this leadership style that like doesn't drive authority or something, whatever it might be.
Mm,
So I'm curious, like what thoughts or advice would you give someone trying to shift more towards a more inclusive, humanized leadership style
sure.
without losing like credibility or without losing authority?
Of course. So
Yeah,
I really want us to reframe, like when you humanize, you're putting the people first. How is that soft?
right.
Right? Like, how is that soft when you're humanizing and bringing humanness to your leadership? I want to go back to the second question, Rob, you asked around like what sparked this idea in me. And I'll get
Yep.
to your question too, Nadia. I taught leadership for about 15 years. And, initially I talked from textbooks that talked about all these, one size fits all frameworks. If a situation is like this, then you do this, and it never really resonated, particularly in our current environment
Mm,
where change is the only constant. Sorry to the phrase overused, but really there's ambiguity, there's all kinds of things going on. And these prescriptive approaches really don't work. So when we talk about humanizing leadership, it's not soft. What it really is, you still have boundaries, you still have
mm.
performance goals, you still have strategy, you
Accountability.
have
Yeah.
accountability, you have all of those things, but you're really seeing the person at the center and you're moving from maybe transactional focus to recognizing that results matter, but the person in front of me equally matters.
Mhm.
Their growth and development equally matters. So, our research, we've done a fairly extensive qualitative research where we spoke with Indigenous women, Black women, racialized women. And when we feel unseen or when we navigate things that impact our well being, and a manager has huge, huge impact on the people that report to them on their well being, even more so than a therapist might. And that's research proven. And
Mhm.
so when we have that kind of impact, then it's our responsibility to bring care, but it doesn't mean that we don't drive results and performance. Again, it's the how we do it. The advice that I would give is at a fundamental level, getting to know the people that report to you. We're often what I hear is, leaders are very busy and there's a lot of work to do. But when we have people under our care, it's ultimately our fundamental responsibility
Mhm.
to take the time to get to know them beyond the annual performance reviews, beyond,
Right.
what is often required. So when you have individuals reporting to you, it's sometimes the day-to-day interactions where you really listen, you ask meaningful questions, you take
Mm.
genuine interest in getting to know the people that are under your care. So I think it's really about deep listening. And one of my favorite phrases is from Otto Scharmer, where he talks about how listening is the most underrated leadership skill,
Mm.
and listening in itself is an act of inclusion,
Mm. It
right?
really is.
It
Mm,
really is. And maybe even transformative listening, which means that we're listening not to respond, but we're really listening in the moment and really thinking about how are we listening across power dynamics, because
Mhm.
that the power dynamics exist in our relationships as leaders with the people that are under our care.
Mhm.
So the quality of our listening, how we show up. And I think to your point, vulnerability is often seen as weakness, right,
Mhm.
with
mhm.
leadership,
Mm.
but it's fundamental in creating psychological safety. If
Mhm.
I am confident, comfortable enough in my own skin to say, you know what, I really don't know the answer to that.
Mhm.
What do you think? Or I made a mistake and I apologize. Those things go a long way in role modeling, in equalizing some of those dynamics. The people under our care, those that work with us, feel more safe to speak up, feel
Mhm.
more safe to share their voice without fear of repercussion, where,
Mm.
like we're humanizing ourselves just as much
Mhm.
as we're taking a human approach. I came across a really interesting research that talked to, even though we think as leaders, we're being really relatable and we think our people open up to us, chances
Mhm.
are we're really off base on that. So we
Mm.
really need to work. twice as hard to create the conditions for that safety and being really mindful of the power dynamics so that people truly are. And I would say that especially for women under our care, and especially Indigenous, Black, and racialized women. There was a study done here in Canada that was just, it was, for me, it was sad, not surprising, but 85% of the respondents said that they feel invisible in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that imply for humanizing leadership?
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Golnaz, everything you said sounds perfect, and I'm reflecting and thinking, about some of the things that you've talked about so far, and it really is like command and control leadership is really, really hot right now. It's made this comeback, right? Where all of a sudden, all the things that you're talking about, which makes so much sense to, the three of us having this conversation, it's kind of faded to the background in some places, right? And so how do we get here? And those of us that are frustrated with some of the leadership styles that we've seen, how do we start to move it toward some of the things that you're talking about?
I mean, how did we get here?
How did we get here?
It's that's a really big question.
It's a loaded question.
A loaded question. I fear-based leadership, command and control, historically has been practiced. But to me, it does not create an environment where people can be innovative at the end of the day. When you are leading by fear, to me, you're living in a house of mirrors where no one's reflecting back, or maybe they're too afraid to reflect back.
Right.
What about this perspective? Your approach may need to consider these things, right? And so when you have the heroic leader that leads through that command and control, my way is the only way, how could that possibly lead to innovation or creativity when you don't have the diversity of perspectives and the courage to be able to speak up when you're in fear?
Yeah.
Golnaz, you created Accelerate Her Future, which is a mentorship program designed specifically for women, but particularly Indigenous, Black, and racialized women. And I'm curious, as we think about leadership and make that connection to sponsorship or even mentorship, of course, those are two separate things. But with your experience in the program for mentorship is often hierarchical. It's formal in the workplace. It can be formalized in the workplace. How can organizations start to rethink mentorship so that it is maybe less formal and more reciprocal, maybe more fun and dynamic, and aligned with the needs of today's workplace, being that it's becoming more modernized and there's a lot more needs from different types of employees, diverse employees? Any reflections or thoughts or learnings that you have?
Yeah, of course. So I don't think there's one approach to mentorship. So we talked about humanizing leadership. I think in our day-to-day as leaders, it's really important to bring that mindset into how we work with those that report to us, right? And so I think part of it is that curiosity, listening, asking a lot of questions, and we can mentor informally as leaders. So I would say maybe asking yourself, if you are a leader, a people leader, asking yourself, who do I mentor the most? Am I mentoring people on my team equally? Am I favoring some and maybe not devoting time to others? And that might cue some self-work that you have to do around why that is, and maybe shifting some things. When we look at data, women of color tend to have mentors lower in the workplace and tend to not have direct interactions with senior leaders. And so what that means is that there's a sponsorship gap. We know sponsorship happens by senior leaders who have the ability to speak names in rooms, to when you're having conversations around promotions, speaking those names, etc. So if women of color don't have that access at those levels, then there's a real gap. And so I think, one, it's inherent on the direct people managers to advocate and to mentor. but also to create formal programs that are reciprocal in nature, but they are structured so that Indigenous, Black, racialized women, and those that have other women with disabilities, et cetera, they can actually have greater access to senior leaders because of structured programs. So it's a combination of informal and formal. And when we look at organizations, certainly here in Canada, we don't see representation in senior leadership. We don't.
In the US too.
Okay, so if that's the case, then what does that say for accessing mentors who have the same lived experience? And
Right.
so this is why these cultures of the organization has to work in lockstep with leaders, et cetera. It's not only an individual issue, but it's a systemic issue that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, and that representation, that's something that I wanted to ask you about as well. I know you've done the research that you've been working on. So there's been recent stories about how women are leaving the workforce at a higher rate than predicted. Those are US numbers. And then recently it was reported that the gender pay gap had actually grown over the last 2 years after going down for many years. Again, those are US. I assume that there might be some relationship with what's happening in Canada as well. And of course, those numbers are different for racialized women, right?
Yes,
they look a
of
little
course.
bit different.
Yeah.
Could you just reflect on what you're seeing, and what are leaders that you're working with? Are they concerned with what they're seeing with the data that we have?
Certainly, I think I'm seeing everything, quite frankly. Some organizations are pulling back. Some are quietly doing the work. And there's always good people in organizations that are prioritizing gender equity, that are prioritizing pay parity, all those things, despite the kind of environment that we're navigating. What really concerns me is I recently came across a stat that showed that while representation and leadership for Indigenous women in Canada has grown slightly since 2020, representation for Black women has grown since 2020, representation for women of color, racialized women has grown. What the problem is that the leadership pipeline, so from senior manager to senior leadership, that's shrinking for all women, but specifically for Indigenous, Black, and racialized women. And so my concern is, with all the efforts that have gone into creating fairness, creating access, creating mobility, if we don't take the issue of gender equity seriously, what will happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now?
Right.
You know, so
Right.
so humanizing leadership to me also means that not only do you get to know the people that, get to know your people and create the conditions for them to thrive, but you're also playing a role in creating systemic change.
Yeah.
Challenging the status quo.
Yeah, it's systemic change, and it's not just about attracting this talent, but retaining this talent and developing, right?
100%.
This talent.
Do I have time to give you one more anecdote? So we're
Please.
doing roundtables across the country with leaders in HR, in talent development, and we have them map on the employee life cycle from attraction, recruitment, all the way to exit. Where are they seeing in their roles the biggest barriers and gaps on this life cycle? And it's so interesting for Indigenous women so far across a few cities, attraction and recruitment is what they've said. But to your point, Nadia, if we don't do the work in creating organizations that are safe and welcoming, then retention is an issue. And I heard a stat that retaining Indigenous women or people in Canada, the average span is 1 year.
Wow.
Right? For Black women across so far the cities that we've looked at, promotion was the biggest theme. Not surprising, our research tells us that the people leaders are not giving direct, meaningful feedback. Career pathways are unclear.
Right.
Career development discussions aren't happening in the way that they need to. And advancement and nominations for high potential leadership development opportunities, we have a ways to go. So no wonder promotion is an issue. And then across the board, as you said, retention, engagement, and development also came up. So, again, we can't have one size fits all. We really need to look at disaggregated data to see what's happening. And then leaders at all levels must work together to address some of these barriers.
And be more humanizing.
And be more humanizing, yes.
Well, Golnaz, thank you so much for this really wonderful conversation. And, I think after your research, after you've finished completing the study and doing all of these roundtables, we'd love to hear more about that. So hopefully you'll come back and share that information with us. It was such a pleasure having you chat with us today. Thank you for joining us on the Leadership and Innovation Unlocked podcast. Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back with our Conv Reflections and Raves and Rants.
Welcome back, everyone. We just finished chatting with our guest, Dr. Golnaz Golnaraghi. Nadia, just curious, for folks that haven't been with us for a while, when we talk to the guests, we come back and then we have a conversation, we reflect, and we call that conreflection, which we own the trademark to that term, right? So
Right.
what did you take away from our conversation?
I really enjoyed our conversation. I felt that Golnaz really honed in on this leading with humanity and really having kind of this discussion around how leaders can show up with care, and accountability, and really creating those cultures of belonging and innovation, right? And trust. And we talked so much about, how to listen and how to lead and how to make decisions. And so I really appreciated her thoughts and her insights, and really interested in learning more about the study that her team conducted. What were your takeaways?
Well, I mean, I think, she's an expert, and she was definitely playing all the leadership expert hits, right? Like, I was in love with all of them, right? So talking about
Totally.
human-centered leadership and how uh, that is inclusive by nature, and I thank her for humoring me, because I really am trying to figure out, like, how we went so off course to the point where now people think of leadership as sitting in a circle with all your direct reports around you telling you how awesome you are, right? And
Yeah.
which is so far from everything we know about leadership, everything in the world. And so
Yeah.
she, talked about how, why would putting others at the center and helping others belong, why would that ever be considered soft? Why would listening to people ever be considered soft, right? And so,
Right.
I thank her for that. So yeah, I really enjoyed talking to her, and really excited to hear about the research that the organization has done.
Yeah, we'll make sure we share that with our listeners for sure. All right, that's great. Thanks again to Dr. Golnaz Golnaraghi for that conversation. Next up is our rants and raves. Rob, I'm sorry, I always give you the rants.
I know you always have,
Um,
eh,
it's because I find a piece of good news and I'm like, I want to share that. But do
right.
you want to share your rant
We should just
first?
do all raves, but I will
We sh-
do. I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm going to talk again about
Okay.
equity and Robbie Starbuck in that conversation that we talked about earlier said that equity, that all DEI had to be bad because equity is communist and it's Marxist, and so I just want can we just all agree that equity is not something that is made up, right? It's not a concept that we just can believe in or not believe in.
Right.
The degree to which you feel equity is important is determined by how much power one holds or one's ability to influence the rules of the game, whatever game you happen to be playing, right? And
Mhm.
so if you get to make the rules, you don't care as much about equity. If you have no ability to change the rules or you have less power, equity becomes pretty damn important to you, right? And so I just want people to get that through to folks. And it's something that is really bothers me when we have discussions about equity.
Yeah. All right. I love that. Look at that rant. You're doing a true rant, Rob. All right. Well, I will end here on a rave. So last week, Misty Copeland, the trailblazing ballerina who became the first African American woman to be named principal dancer at the American Ballet Theater in 2015,
Hmm.
took her final bow. And I just her legacy really as an inspiration, I think, for a lot of young women, young girls, really proof that anything is possible, especially as we think about art and leading in that artistry world. So I want to just congratulate Misty and celebrate in general ballet and art.
Ah, what a positive thing to end on. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Nadia.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, folks. Well, that wraps up this week's episode. Leadership and Innovation Unlocked is a production of Inclusive Collective Media and edited by Ari Mathey. We'd love to hear from you, folks. So send us your feedback at inclusivecollectivepodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, follow us, rate us. We like 5 stars wherever you get your podcast, and share with your friends. Rob, thank you again for a great episode. Folks, we'll see you again in 2 weeks on November 18th. Be well.